Everybody, welcome in. And today I'm here with Tony just to finish up our Who's Next series where we're breaking down the SEC coaches that Alabama is going to face in 2020. And Tony, I think we saved one of the most interesting conversations for last. Auburn's Gus Malzahn. Is something in the water over there? Has he made some sort of deal with a sorcerer? Like, how is he the guy that's beaten Nick Saban 3 times and no one else has been able to do it more than once, I think, in the SEC?
It almost feels like Gus Malzahn focuses like half his season on beating Nick Saban because he always has like the perfect play or plan that's going to catch Nick off guard. And, we kind of saw that last year with the fake punt or the punt that caused Alabama to have a game-ending penalty. And so it seems like he always has some kind of trick up his sleeves. You could say, I don't know if you necessarily say that he's got Saban's number, but he definitely does so more than any other coach. So out of all the coaches we've talked about, look at the most dangerous against Saban. It's definitely Malzahn.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not it's not always a trick play, and it's not always a miracle, although you can certainly point to examples of that. There are plays or even games where Auburn's just kind of looked better, at least for that day. He's kind of beaten Nick in every way possible by this point. It's not like there's one thing that he does that it has frustrated this Alabama program.
Yeah, so look at last year's game, that there was some freaky plays there that happened. And then if you look at the last time they lost before that, that was probably the most he's done, as well as just beating Alabama.
Yeah.
But before that, you've had the kick six. And so then you had it wasn't really him with the comeback, but you know what I'm saying? It just seems like there's been some fluky plays between Malzahn. I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I think he's a good coach. It's just it always feels like Malzahn's hanging on to his job, and then he plays Nick Saban, beats him, and then all is good again in Auburn. And it's just kind of really interesting how that works out.
All is good. The contract extension comes through. The
right
truck with the money backs up.
It just seems like maybe he is spending extra time on preparing for Alabama, and maybe I don't blame him because it's been working for him. But it's going to be tough to win this one because you're going to have the target back on his back, and now it's going to be in Tuscaloosa. I'm sure Alabama fans, or not just Alabama fans, sorry, Alabama in general has got this one targeted, kind of like the way that they do with the LSU game. And I think you're going to see maybe a payback. I'm sure if Mac Jones is the starter at that time, he's really going to want that game back because of those 2 throws he made. So it'll be interesting to see, how Alabama responds to Auburn this year.
Do we expect in 2020 – I'll ask it. It seems like a stupid question. Do we expect the Iron Bowl in 2020 to be as competitive as it was last year?
I think you always have to kind of expect the Iron Bowl to be competitive. It seems like it's not as competitive when it's in Bryant-Denny, and then all the really good games are in Jordan-Hare. But I think you can't go into the Iron Bowl thinking that it's going to not be competitive. I do think this Alabama team is better than Auburn this year, but I think you could make the argument that they were better than Auburn last year and they lost. So obviously that game, Auburn can always beat Alabama. Alabama can always beat Auburn. So it's going to be an interesting game. And look, you have A&M right before it, so it's not that cupcake right before. You could be tired heading into the Auburn game, which is something that you're normally not necessarily always doing.
Yeah, and I think there's some talk about Bo Nix really developing into one of the best SEC quarterbacks next year. He's one of the few guys that has a full season's worth of experience that's coming back. But there's not a whole lot of talk about Auburn, at least in the national landscape at this point. And normally those are the years you kind of have to watch the Tigers because they come out of nowhere. Normally the years when we go, yeah, I think the Iron Bowl is going to be a good one, which we do say every year. But, the years we kind of expect Auburn to show up and be a national title contender, Auburn's normally, got 2 or 3 losses by the time they face Alabama.
We'll see how that offensive line does because I think, I do believe that Bo Nix can be good. It's just if he doesn't have anyone blocking for him and he's running for his life, I don't think you're going to see that progression as much as you would have seen it. So I think that's really the story for Auburn this year is, can they give Bo Nix enough time to develop as a quarterback? And if they can, like I said, I think he's a great quarterback. I think he can be, a dual threat kind of guy, and a guy that can just really hurt you in a lot of ways. And we've seen him kind of make big plays. He hasn't been the most consistent passer, but he's the guy I think that could make big plays for Auburn and be a quarterback that could win games. But if he's constantly scrambling for his life, if he's spending a lot of time on the ground, I think you're going to see him rush decisions, make bad plays, and then you're going to kind of take a step back in terms of his progression. So it's really important for him and for Auburn that they kind of allow him to grow.
Yeah, and we talked about the schedule change with the SEC, when we discussed A&M and Mississippi State and kind of getting shuffled around, but it's affected Auburn's schedule too. When Auburn obviously got Georgia moved, but LSU got moved back, so it's just I think you could look at Auburn's schedule and go, Auburn kind of got messed up by the schedule change as much as anyone in the SEC.
Yeah, it's going to be different for a lot of people. And so it's just, you get so used to these games being at a certain time. And almost, it's almost like how you look at the opponent too, because it's always like, you play this team before this team and you kind of know where they're going to be at in the season. And so it'll just be interesting to see how Auburn responds to an LSU later in the season and, how they respond to a Georgia team earlier in the season. And same thing for Alabama with A&M and when you switch around things, I think it's just really interesting to see, not only like A&M and Auburn, that's hard back to back, right? But like just playing A&M in November is probably going to be tougher than playing them earlier in the season.
Yeah, we sort of made this case for A&M, why A&M could be 10-0 and in the driver's seat or right there with Alabama for the SEC West. You could almost make the same case for Auburn because even if Auburn loses to Georgia, the rest of the schedule is winnable. You look at that A&M game as maybe the big outlier, but then, you have LSU at November 21st and then Alabama the next week. So, you can make the case Auburn could get to the LSU-Alabama stretch and, either be right there with those teams and the driver's seat for the SEC West or even with a loss to Georgia, control its own destiny.
Yeah, it's really those last 2 weeks of the season, because it's Auburn, LSU, it's Alabama, Texas A&M, and it's Alabama, Auburn, and then I think it's Texas A&M, LSU. So it's like it's like this round robin. It seems like of teams that are all playing each other. So I think everything's going to be decided in the conference late. So yeah, like you said, a lot of times it is between Alabama and LSU, but the SEC West could easily be between Alabama and Auburn. And I think that would just be. I mean, whenever that's the case, it's usually an interesting game. So, and then Auburn usually plays really well when they have something on the line for that game. And I think most of the time when they win, it's they had something on the line. They usually go to the SEC championship game. I know they didn't this year, but most of the time when they beat Alabama, it's in the midst of a big season. So, I think if they're riding that momentum, it's going to be a tough win, even if it is in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
One thing I did just to get back to Malzahn before we finish up with this series, 3-4 against Saban. So if he's able to win this year, he'll be even with Saban, which is a tremendous accomplishment. And then, obviously that would put Auburn and Alabama in position to kind of, he could prove he's better than Saban with a win, with 2 wins. It's easy to look back for me at the 2014 Iron Bowl that I was at that game. And Alabama wins 55-44. But going into the half, Alabama threw 2 picks, came right out of the half and threw another pick. That seems like the classic, game Alabama should have won that would slipped away. That seems like, Malzahn was going to start his Auburn era off 2-0 against the Crimson Tide. Yeah,
it's hard to beat Alabama 2 years in a row. And I think that's something that, if he wants to take the next step in this rivalry, that's what – what happens. I think, Alabama's beaten Auburn 2 times in a row. numerous times, but
Mm-hmm.
lately Auburn hasn't been able to return the favor. It's just been, it's almost like they've always caught Alabama off guard, or they've hit Alabama when they're down, like last year. But so if they can come into Tuscaloosa after already beating them, Alabama's going to be, pissed and
Mm-hmm.
ready. And if Auburn can still win, I think that's a really big statement. I think regardless of how the outcome of that game turns out, if they're able to win 2 in a row in this series, I think it's the biggest win out of all of them.
And I have to think that would help on the recruiting trail when suddenly the
Oh, yeah.
Auburn staff can go, Malzahn 4-4 against Nick Saban, dead even. Nick Saban hasn't beaten Auburn more than we've beaten them. I have to think that may not play a huge role this year, but that's a huge thing you can sell to recruits down the road.
Definitely. I mean, especially with those in-state recruits. I mean, look, if Auburn wins against Alabama this year, there's a good chance they're going to the playoff. Just because I think if they're going to beat Alabama, they're probably going to have a good team. And so,
Mm-hmm.
two wins in the rivalry in a row, and then a trip to the playoff. Probably, unless they do something weird during the season. Um, yeah, that's a huge momentum you can take, and I think some of these in-state kids are going to see that, and they're there'll be talk about a shift in power if that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I wouldn't necessarily project that to happen. I don't think Tony and I would predict Auburn to win this Iron Bowl, but you can never feel safe making any predictions on that game. But yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't predict 2021 recruits necessarily to all flip late if Auburn somehow wins that game, but
Oh yeah, but
2022 guys, 2023 guys, those guys I think are the guys you need to worry about going forward. Um, but I think that's really a good stopping point for the series. Tony and I just want to thank y'all for checking out these videos. Definitely go back and check out some of the others. You don't have to watch them all. Go back and watch some of your favorite coaches. I know that I love talking about Lane Kiffin. That's probably the one conversation I would push people to check out the most. We had a great one about Jimbo here recently. We talked about whether Ed Orgeron is the second best coach in the SEC West. Turns out he might be. And then, obviously there's Kirby Smart. So that we kick things off with. So I'd go back, watch the videos you missed if you found this at all interesting. Also, make sure that you're keeping up with both our YouTube page and the BamaInsider.com page, because we're going to post recruiting content, to each of those pages daily, sometimes 2-3 times a day. And you're going to want to make sure you check a couple times each day just to make sure that you're getting everything.